Welcome to 10,000 Tacos. 10,000 Tacos is a podcast about the taco life and the culture that goes with it. Each show, we bring you conversations and perspectives connected to that taco life. We speak to taqueros, tamaleros, molineros, as well as scholars, journalists who help us understand and see Mexican food beyond the tortilla. Along with José Ralat, I am Isidro Salas, and thank you for joining us today. Today on the show, José, please start us off with, and this is first I've ever heard of, is it so that Tejanos take things personally, especially when it comes to food? Again, por favor, José, get us started, my friend.
Texans take everything personally. It doesn't have to be anything special. For example, in conversation years ago, I mentioned that I didn't care for a particular movie. The person across from me was offended. It was if I told a mother that her child was the ugliest bag of bones on the planet. Texans take their food even more seriously, especially barbecue and tacos. That character trait or flaw, whatever you want to call it, occasionally causes a big hullabaloo. One of those occasions occurred in February 2016. That's when Eater.com writer Matthew Tedaka's story about Austin being the birthplace of the breakfast taco was published. San Antonians lost their shit and took to social media and the web to gnash their teeth on Twitter. A tongue-in-cheek change.org petition to ban Tedaka from Texas was published online. Eventually, Eater quietly, without an editor's note, revised the text to state that Austin popularized the breakfast taco. But the writer's misunderstanding of the staple remained. In the story, the journalist writes, the recipe is simple. Take a tortilla and stuff it with desired breakfast ingredients: eggs, processed yellow cheese, pork, etc. Anyone who has glanced at a breakfast taco menu in San Antonio and South Texas knows this is not true. The range is great. They include carne guisada tacos, barbacoa tacos, pork chop tacos. The diversity is almost endless. But back to the war. Texas radio stations got involved. TV stations threw in their hats too. My employer, Texas Monthly, got involved, although at that point I was just a freelancer. I got involved by writing a history of breakfast tacos on Vice's food vertical, Munchies, where I was a columnist at the time. And one of the points I made was that the Texas congressional delegation had to have a really big meeting, and they needed to ensure that everyone showed up. So they offered breakfast tacos to everyone. Even Ted Cruz showed up. That being said, in 2016, when we had this great taco war, and it is called the Great Breakfast Taco War of 2016, the mayors got involved. The vitriol was palpable. Austin Mayor Stephen Adler didn't help things. He held rallies where he shouted the bona fides of Austin breakfast tacos, and even in a moment of fervor, declared he would lead a march on San Antonio. I don't know if that claim was scripted, but there were scripted takes on the breakfast taco war, among other things. The person behind that was Jason Stanford, former chief of communication and engagement for the mayor. Fast forward to March 18th, Stanford wrote an installment on his Substack newsletter, The Experiment, that surprised me. The post was a response to former San Antonian and actor Pedro Pascal's statement that tacos are better in San Antonio than in Austin. San Antonio media and residents grabbed onto this and they ran with it. Every possible media outlet published something about it. While I generally agree with Pascal, the latest dust-up was another sign of how Texans take everything so personally. And honestly, I think San Antonio's got a bit of an inferiority complex. It's got a frustration with being in the shadow of a much smaller and much younger city. Remember, San Antonio is more than 300 years old and is the culinary and cultural capital of Texas. Stanford's newsletter explained that San Antonio didn't understand that Austin's mayor was joking at the time. Like many of Austin's moves, it came across as a PR stunt with a sprinkling of cynical humor. San Antonio was ultimately a punchline. I didn't understand that the mayor was joking. That's why I think it was a, kind of cynical and a big marketing stunt. Today, we'll be talking with Jason about the Great Breakfast Taco War of 2016, the book he co-authored, Forget the Alamo, and other taco wars. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, how are you?
All right. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for that kind introduction.
You're welcome.
So, real quick, before we get started, we have a very important question. It's probably the most important question of the taco world. Jose, would you like to do the honors?
Is a burrito a taco?
No, a burrito is a burrito and a taco is a taco.
Hold on. Let's get the applause. People see. I mean, it's
now. I'm sure Jose could argue and explain to me my wrongness, as people do several times a day, and I will yield to his wisdom on this matter because I am purely going by the names.
That's a great answer.
But they seem very different to me. Like a burrito is like this big old thing, and a taco is a little smaller thing that's open.
Yeah,
now,
and
you can make a little small taco.
We are officially tied again. And yesterday, the tie was broken. And of all people, it was a person in Los Angeles who went and said, yes, a burrito is a taco.
Well, that should prove that you're right. If a Californian thinks you're wrong, come on.
Isidro's a Californian.
Well,
former Californian.
So smart. No, I used to live there too. It's a lovely place.
So before we dive deep into this, I want to know why you brought up the Taco War of 2016 last month. What really struck you?
So every once in a while it comes up again.
Yes.
And it's never from Austin. Austin doesn't care. Like you said, the one thing about Texans is we make everything a big deal. That's true up to a point, but Austin never made a big deal about this. They kept thinking it was hilarious that anyone was getting upset about Eater. It comes up. Ron Nierenberg said something a while back, and then this actor said something, and it gets tons of press, and everyone's fighting about it in the chat. And I thought at some point we should let San Antonio know that it was all just a joke. We thought it was funny. It wasn't marketing. No one would honestly sit down and think, oh, this is a smart marketing play to go to war with San Antonio. We thought it'd be a laugh. And we've been living rent-free in San Antonio's head for 5 years. Which is great because rents are going too high here.
Rents are going too, well, real estate's going up in San Antonio. While I live in Dallas and my office is in Austin, I was looking to relocate to what everyone considers Taco Town. I figured, hey, the taco guy should live in Taco Town.
Austin?
Right? Can't afford it. Can't afford it. Can't afford it at all.
Oh.
And I own my own home here, so.
They should make a special place for you there in San Antonio.
Right downtown, next to the Alamo.
They should give you the concession contract for the Alamo.
Yeah, and the roof of his house should be like like the color of a tortilla. Not a flour tortilla, a corn tortilla, of course.
Obviously a corn tortilla. We're not heathens.
I gave a bit of the history
Right.
of the war, and I think that's pretty much the gist of it. But it really got serious.
Well,
and people flipped out.
Only in San Antonio. Like the only thing that made it funny was how seriously San Antonio took it. It was it wasn't just, regular people out there in the chat, as I say. It was the mayor's office.
Yeah.
And, Ivy Taylor's office called us and said, you really need to admit that we need you to publicly admit that San Antonio's tacos are better. And I thought, this is the most hilarious thing I've ever heard of, because they were genuinely upset about what some out-of-state writer wrote on some publication about tacos. Who cares what they think? But we didn't even really intend to start a war. It was just a joke we were telling in front of college students. We thought it'd be funny. And if the statesman hadn't showed up to try to cover this volunteer event, that's the last anyone would have ever heard of it.
I don't really have skin in that game. And some would say I don't really have a great sense of humor. I didn't know Adler was joking. And you've said in previous conversation, that's why he's funny.
Yeah. So when I told him once that the comic persona I had in my head for him was Sam the Eagle. And he said, well, who's that? I said, exactly. That's why it's funny. But I don't think there is a literal interpretation of inviting several hundred college students to march on San Antonio at dawn that isn't understanding that was meant in jest. We were not literally trying to draft college students into an actual war. It was not meant to be taken seriously.
So 2 years later, there was another taco war that I was inadvertently.
You started that one, buddy.
I didn't start it. I didn't write the headline. I wrote the story.
Who's byline? Who's byline, bucko?
Sounds like Clinton, right? I didn't inhale.
So Jose
for those
is the Bill Clinton of tacos. There's a war.
Yeah.
That
could go different ways.
Yeah. I did not have, what?
Taco
with a tortilla.
So for those who don't know, in 2018, I wrote a cover story for D Magazine. And it was basically a feature package about all the taco types here, featuring taquero profiles, maps. It was great work for me. It paid really well as a freelancer. And I was shocked when the editor posted the cover. I was like, oh, shit, this is going to ruin my week. And sure enough, I got piled on. And San Antonio media outlets claimed that in this feature, I said Dallas was the taco capital of Texas. I never said that. And as a matter of fact, the magazine wasn't even out on newsstands yet. So how could they know? It wasn't online either. So, Jason, how much would you say that inferiority complexes and these Texas myths come into play with these kinds of things?
San Antonio is the taco capital of Texas. I'm not saying it's not, but it definitely is the myth capital of Texas. And I think people get upset in San Antonio. It seems like they don't get their proper due. And I disagree with you. I'm not sure it's the culinary. Houston might have some disagreement on whether or not it's the culinary capital of Texas. But it's a hell of a city. It is definitely, of the top 10 cities in this country by size, it is definitely the most underrated. And there's no city, it's like San Antonio, it's like Miami, in that you can't mistake it for any other city in the world. And it used to be on the edge of a European empire. It's got all this great history. It's wonderful. And people just don't notice it because their big things are for San Antonio. Fiesta is for people in San Antonio. Yes, people probably come from elsewhere. The Alamo, weirdly, is one of those things that no one in San Antonio goes to. It's only for people out of town. But people think of going to the Alamo. They don't think of really going to San Antonio. It's not like Austin, right? The world comes to Austin every year, and it gets all this attention from writers like the one we were talking about earlier. And so they come here to Austin and they think they've discovered America. They're like Columbus. They showed up and went, hey, look, land.
Yeah.
And so that's what happens when people come here and they think they've discovered something that, maybe we got from San Antonio. Maybe San Antonio got it from Corpus. I don't know. But things move around like that. But when Austin has become the city that people go to, it's like the Vegas you don't have to lie about, right? It's the second biggest bachelorette destination in the country, which is a designation we are in no way proud of. But people come to Austin from all over the world to party. And yes, San Antonio has a bigger conference center, but it hasn't become the sort of global destination that captures people's imagination. And I can totally understand how Austin looks from their point of view, that we are a whiter city. It's, we get all the damn attention and a lot of it's undeserved. From their point of view, totally get it. That said, holy cow, are they easy to upset. D magazine. They should not be reacting to a D magazine. If you were really confident you had the best tacos, who cares what D magazine says? Now, your byline drives news no matter what, and I can understand how that's a real threat. But, if you're really that great, what do you care what other people think?
I was offended when Mayor Ron Nierenberg tweeted solely LOL.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, you're trying to get a rise out of me. Privately, he did. Publicly, I responded with, just saying he was disrespectful and then inviting him up so that I could personally give him and his team a tour on my own dime.
I know. And the fact that he didn't take that, it's like going on a baseball tour with Cal Ripken. I mean, you're not going on a taco tour with José? Come on. And a 3-letter response, I understand. I thought, if they're really offended, maybe a 4-letter response would have been in order.
When I hear you speak about San Antonio and Austin, it's similar, but not the same. It's San Jose and San Francisco, right?
Oh, really?
The Silicon Valley, where in San Francisco is called the Silicon Valley by a lot of outsiders. And it's not even a valley, it's a port. Right?
Yeah.
And most of Silicon Valley lies in the South Bay. And people dismiss San Jose, even though it's the 3rd largest city in the state. And I believe it's the 10th largest in the United States. It's slightly ahead of Austin. So it's got over 1 million, but people don't have this, like if somebody says San Francisco tacos are better than San Jose, nobody cares, like, because you can get those tacos everywhere. And that's where, going to the beginning of this episode was like, Texans take things really, really personal. And, like San Jose is always looked at as the little brother when it's in fact bigger than San Francisco. But man, when I was scrolling through some of these tweets and texts, I'm like, man, that they do take it serious. And, but when my first time in San Antonio, I agree also that it is very underrated.
Totally.
The first time I ever went, I went to the Riverwalk and I'm like, this is it? It looks like a creek. And I left. And it was in the middle of the summer. I was like, nobody wants to be in Texas in the middle of the summer. So we left. That's all
Texas
we saw.
Rivers.
Yeah. And then I had the fortune of traveling down there with José, and we stayed there a couple of days. And I was just amazed how much stuff I had missed and how much history is there. It reminded me, the city is huge. It has so many new and old things to it. And then the food. I mean, almost everywhere we went, we had the fortune of going with Rodrigo. He's down in the audience there. He drove us around a few places, local places. And I was there was one night we were sitting at this restaurant where there was nothing but local people. And I'm like, this is what people are missing out on. And the food. And it was just, I had a 180 on it. And I see it more like San Jose. It gets disrespected. It gets unnoticed. But I don't know. I do find it interesting how serious these taco wars get, because
no,
it's
San
fun.
Antonio is it's a stunning city. It's wonderful.
Though you had mentioned it's the myth capital of Texas, and the Alamo, which is the subject of your great book and a point of pride for many Texans, is very much just a footnote. Like the Battle of Puebla, it was a morale booster. And the people involved in it are very reflective of Texas today. There were Tejanos. As you write in your book, Tejanos were early proponents of separation from Coahuila and they flirted with the idea of their own independence. But people like Stephen Austin blew them off until William Travis was like, let's do it. And then Austin, who had a very typical point of view of an educated person, which was saying that slavery was morally corrupt but necessary, tells us a lot about Texas now and Texas then, because almost immediately what happened was every American who fought for independence turned their backs on their fellow citizens who just happened to be dark-skinned or darker skinned. One of them was Juan Seguin, whose family was an early supporter of separation and whose family they're heroes left and right. Seguin's nephew won the Battle of Puebla and was a Texan himself. Do you see shadows of the Alamo and the way Tejanos were treated after independence?
Oh, yeah.
Alongside, within these taco wars.
I don't know how strongly I can draw that parallel. However amusing
it's a big jump for me. Yes, I know.
I admire the leap and the audacity. That speaks well of you. No, I think there is something to, and I'll own this, there's something to how blithe we were in just making a lark out of a genuine feeling by San Antonio. And there was a racial aspect to the Great Breakfast Taco War that I am in no way comfortable with. But yeah, I mean, there is a heritage to that cuisine, right? It's not you can't separate it from being Hispanic. There is a cultural payload to the taco that white boy showing up in Texas at the age of 23 isn't totally in on, and that the writer for Eater wasn't in on. So if I were to do it all over today, I'm sure I would be a lot more aware of the cultural weight of the breakfast taco, because the writing the Alamo book, there's things and then you keep talking to people and their lived experiences, and you just have to, their perspective becomes yours. Both from the side of, I've got a boomer friend of mine, he grew up in San Antonio, and he played Alamo after school with his friends. And on one side were all the Hispanic kids, and on the other side were all the white kids. But guess who won when they played? And then you talk to Hispanic kids or Hispanic guys my age, and it reminded me at first of being in Los Angeles growing up and never going to Disneyland. That was just other people. I thought at first the Alamo just represented some tourist attraction. But then I realized it was this story that was told all through their lives about how, it's basically white people history, right? The white guys were all the heroes. And Juan Seguin, who really should be like the biggest action hero in Texas history, was a sidekick. And they never really told how great his story and how interesting and deep his story became after the Alamo. But it was just this dang story that white people told each other to make themselves feel good. And it was a story that, without anyone maybe perhaps consciously realizing it was also a story that made Hispanics feel like second-class citizens in Texas. And since it has always been that way, it explained to me why, when I showed up here in the mid-'90s, white people would so casually refer to Hispanics as Mexicans. And
all of them?
Just kind of refer to, like, just as a designation of Hispanics, and not trying to refer to their nationality, but that as a synonym for Hispanic. And it seems strange to me, because I grew up in Washington State. It's just a different environment. And only if you think of Hispanics as the Mexicans at the Alamo does that even culturally make sense. Because they weren't, these weren't, bullet spitting racists. They're just dumbass white people. And it wasn't a conscious thought. They didn't have a whole worldview built around this. It was just a reflexive thing that came up.
Technically, they were all Mexicans, weren't they?
Weren't they? Yeah.
So, Isidro, move us into the FACOs. It's plural, really. FACOs today.
Yeah, so it's FACO time.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know what a FACO is, it's sort of like an opposite of a taco. A taco brings a smile, brings people together. It is a cultural food that's shared with everybody. But a FACO is the opposite of that. So easy examples of a FACO is a Taco Bell trying to say that they invented a cheese quesadilla and call it a grilled cheese tortilla. I don't know. And so when we talk about a FACO, it's trying to get it out of your system so that we can live easier lives. And so a FACO is that, right? And it sort of sounds like a 4-letter word that we can't say on the radio. I could say it here.
I hadn't noticed.
And so today's FACO is actually, it just came today. We had another FACO lined up, but this FACO just stepped right in front of it.
We should talk about both of them quickly, but the one that surprised me this morning was George P. Bush's tweet that read, well, that has this big photo with the border fence, and then the big letter words are, gosh, I can't speak today. The text overlaid says, assert sovereignty, declare an invasion of Texas. There we go.
What a bunch of crap.
And he says that we can declare the invasion using the U.S. Constitution, which I'm no constitutional scholar. But I did take civics when they offered civics in schools, and that's not true. He wants to basically declare war and called out Paxton, who he's going to lose to.
Yep.
And first of all, how is this guy following me on Twitter? Second of all,
I'm going to send him a tweet.
It's because you're awesome.
Oh, well, thank you, but that's not true either. Not only is what he tweeted repugnant, I think it's traitorous. And I know that's not a real argument to make, but his own mother is a Mexican immigrant. And so he is being a traitor to his own kind. Mm-hmm. In Spanish, we call those people vendidos, sellouts. What do you think, Jason?
Well, before you answer that, sorry, Jason. We had two FACOs.
What was the other one? Yeah.
Which will tie into you is the quote, remember the Alamo, unquote. And it's a phrase that is sprinkled with racism in it. And most people will dismiss it, right? Most people, like, I grew up in California in the same way. Like, remember the Alamo? I learned the Alamo story from the perspective of how the Anglo looked at it. Yep. So I didn't think anything of it. And part of the stuff that you tackle on your book is a lot of stuff from the Alamo. And remember the Alamo, it's not the same as this tweet that this guy put out, but it's this dog whistle. It's a rhetoric to galvanize, it's a wrong message. And if you look into it deeper, it's what's the problem? These messages don't change. So we wanted to talk a little bit more about that, a part of the Alamo. Remember the Alamo.
Yeah, remember the Alamo. The real use, people talk, 7th grade history teachers teach that the strategic value of the Battle of the Alamo for the Texians was that it gave, it held up Santa Anna and gave Sam Houston time to raise an army, which, if you look at the chronology, isn't true. And this is a long way to get around to your question. In fact, at the end of the siege, Santa Anna's army was still catching up. He was in such a hurry that he outran his cannon. And so even the big guns were just showing up at the end of the siege. At the end of the siege, Sam Houston still didn't really have an army. Its real value was now all the white folks in Texas knew that Santa Anna was going to kill them as traitors, right? And so they knew, remember the Alamo became, join us or he's just going to slaughter you. So it started as a way to raise an army and to inspire vengeance against Santa Anna. And forevermore, it has become a way to rouse people to war. LBJ used it to both in World War II and then in the Korean War, and then most famously and repeatedly and ludicrously in the Vietnam War. There were congressmen who mentioned it, who called Saddam Hussein a modern-day Santa Anna. It comes up all the time when we're trying to justify going to war, usually with people with skin different color than ours. And it's also the most disturbingly used in extremist right-wing politics. David Koresh compared himself to Colonel Travis and called his compound the Alamo. You have the gun groups. We're all used to seeing the come and take it with the AR-15 now. That, of course, is a take on the flag from Gonzales, the come and take it with the cannon, which is a Texas revolutionary symbol. And there are a lot of soldiers over there in Iraq and Afghanistan who named their forward bases the Alamo. It has become this voyeuristic, the shorthand that we use in our heads about people taking a proud stand against overwhelming odds and inspiring people to vengeance, if not violence. Sorry.
No, this is exactly what we wanted to talk about. I went to Gonzales this past weekend, and I visited the site of the battle. And what struck me is how unremarkable it is, and how there's there's a boat launch just around the corner,
right?
And everyone just sort of drives past these two with very small typeface, but it's just a field now.
Yep.
There's nothing remarkable about it. There's no historical prop, right? I would imagine they'd litter that field with cannons just to boast, because that seems like a very Texas thing.
Yeah.
And then I went to Seguin's gravesite. And again, it was unremarkable. It confused me. These are two very important points in Texas history, and one of my dogs agrees with me. I can hear him. Yeah. Are just afterthoughts. It just seems wrong.
Can I add to that? When I went for the first time to the Alamo, again with my wife, looked at the river and I was like, okay, this is it. But we passed by the Alamo, right? And I may not agree with how the story's been told of the historical, significance. But I will say that I was very disappointed in that people are taking selfies and they're treating it like a freaking amusement park when it's a grave. People died there. If you've ever had the fortune to go to visit Pearl Harbor, when you're on the boat to get there, it's very somber, very quiet. And it's similar to when you go to the 9/11 memorial, right? Especially in New York City, where you hear horn, but when you're sitting in the memorial, it's quiet and somber. Once in a while, you'll see a little kid like, but it's very somber. Now, the Alamo, again, I may not agree with the story that's being told, but people died there, and it should have more respect, and it doesn't.
No, and I think it's because they've done such a horrible job of placemaking that you have no idea where you are when you're at the Alamo. And a lot of that is a function of the fact that until recently, from the beginning of time until Ron Nuremberg signed it over, the street and the plaza in front of what we think of as the Alamo, the church and the Long Barracks, were owned by the city. And the church and the Long Barracks are owned by the state. And so to get anything done with that space, you have to get them both on board. And for a long time, the state was content to let a heritage society called the Daughters of the Republic of Texas run the place. And they were mostly concerned with getting money from the gift shop. That's it. So, they were in no way qualified to run a historical site. And so you have a problem of where you go, and what you think of as the Alamo is just the church and the Long Barracks. It's not the park behind, really. There's, that's the outer edges of it. Where you're standing is in the middle. You're standing where the bloodiest battle was, or the Long Barracks really were, but people died where you're standing, and you have no idea that you're in the middle of it. Behind you, at Ripley's, that's where Jim Bowie died. The tourist traps are where the other wall. And you have no idea, there's a line, a little brass marker of the makeshift wall where Davy Crockett was apparently detailed. But you don't know that you're in the middle of this site that was hugely important in not just Texas history, but turns out American history as well, because that's what really opened up the Southwest to American expansion. And you're absolutely right, Isidro, that it should be more somber. But, at least at Andersonville, you have a sense of the space. At Gettysburg, you have a sense that you're on a battlefield. At the Alamo, you think you're on a city street next to a Haagen-Dazs. And so we can't expect people to be somber at a place that isn't somber, that has no expectation of behavior that way.
So in schools, like you mentioned earlier, specifically in 7th grade, there is a Texas history course. My son is in 7th grade.
All right.
And what I say to him? Oh, I said, look at me. And then he looks at me and I said, everything they tell you is going to be a lie. And without blinking, he said, I know. The kid's 13 years old. Apparently he's been reading.
or he has Fireside on his phone.
Or it could be osmosis. I don't know. But it turns out, because I get weekly reviews of classwork dropped in my emails, they've changed a lot of the discussions, a lot of the talking points. It's no longer about freedom fighting. It's very much about slavery and about race. That gives me hope. Your book gives me hope that there is a whole lot of scholarship coming out now that argues we don't understand the Alamo. We have forgotten all of the crimes committed against Mexican Americans, Texans, throughout the early 20th century. And even now, there are examples. But the Texas Rangers, not the baseball team, but the law enforcement agency, was formed during the Revolution. And they were a lynching mob, basically.
A posse.
A posse, yeah.
Let me. One of the guys we talked about in the book was Andres Tierrina, an incredibly important historian. He invented Mexican American studies. When he showed up at UT in the 70s to get his PhD, he said he wanted to study Mexican American studies, and the dean told him there was no such thing, that there was not such a thing. Not just that there wasn't a discipline, but there was not even that history. He remembers growing up as a kid of migrant workers. And he said sometimes the Texas Rangers would come in, ride their horses into the camp, and he knew they were everyone hid until they shot someone and left. It sounds, I'm a little scared to say it out loud, but they acted like a terrorist organization. And it's because they were enforcing this rule that took place right after the Texas Revolution, which was, as we talked about in the book, kind of an ethnic cleansing. Tejano ranching families were dispossessed of their great ranches in South Texas, and those ranching families were turned into migrant worker families. And generations later, that's the story they tell. They know this. And so you've got families that have been in Texas since before there was a Texas, and they know what happened to them. There aren't a lot of really wealthy, old-timey Hispanic families in town. They're a bunch of working class families. They may have been wealthy at one time, but then the white boys won the Texas Revolution. It was a real bad scene after that, and the Texas Rangers played a big role in that. I don't know that you can teach an accurate depiction of Texas history anymore, though, because of a lot of the state laws that have gone on. And what we've recently seen is the State Board of Education has recently voted to require 6 years of Texas education in the first, in the first 7 or 8 years of school. So it's not like all of civics in first grade will be Texas education, but they're going to have to teach Texas history in that civics class.
Isn't that critical racist theory? Or I'm sorry, did I say that wrong?
You'll get the hang of it. It'll be fine. Keep practicing.
So I don't think he can answer that question.
If your book gets banned in Tennessee and Florida, obviously in Texas, then you've succeeded. That's like Pulitzer,
that'd be great.
Right?
Yeah, I don't know. We'll get banned in Florida because we don't have a lot of math in our book.
That's a good one.
You've gotten pushback from the Texas government, but the one incident at the Briscoe Center? No, the Briscoe Center is in San Antonio.
Yeah, they probably have us.
Yeah. It was at a museum on UT's campus where you were effectively blocked by the lieutenant governor.
Right.
Was that just an isolated incident?
Yeah. So, in the 2 weeks after the book came out, we wrote a lot of essays for like Time and Washington Post and things like that. And the one for Time got a lot of Texas politicians upset. There's Dawn Buckingham, who's running for land commissioner. She tweeted at us and the whole thing. It was fine. I thought this was great. Alan West put out a whole email denouncing us. And I thought we'd hit the big time. But we had, right before the 4th of July, a virtual book event scheduled at the Bob Bullock State History Museum. And a think tank in town, a right-wing think tank called the Texas Public Policy Foundation, started agitating that we should be canceled there because they thought it would be using taxpayer funds to support our radical political agenda of actually representing the history accurately. The oversight of the State History Museum is the governor, the lieutenant governor, the speaker, and a state rep and a state senator. Dan Patrick, never missing a trick, had them cancel our event a couple hours before it took place. And that news, and before this happened, we'd gotten good reviews in the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the front page in the Houston Chronicle and the San Antonio paper, big excerpt in Texas Monthly, and sales were fine. Not, it wasn't great. Dan Patrick made us a bestseller. Before he did that, we were ranked in the 500s on Amazon. We went up into the top 20 because he banned us from the State History Museum. He turned us into a national cause.
What a rallying cry.
God bless him.
Well, we are coming to the end of our conversation. I wanted to know if Rodrigo was available to chat because he's a San Antonian.
Hey, what is going on, y'all? What a fantastic conversation y'all are having right now. I really just want to commend José Isidro for just holding these weekly discussions and also having Jason on because this is all so relevant. I know that we talk about tacos and we have fun and we talk about even some of the sillier stuff, but a lot of this is rooted in real feelings and real things that are happening to cultures and to people here in Tejas, but also around the world. Jason, thank you so much for coming and talking about that and just giving some perspective over those taco roars, because it is San Antonio. I'm the son of San Antonio, okay? I love San Antonio. Jose and Isidro came down. I tried to show them a good time here, but it's true. San Antonio has always been regarded as kind of like, the side piece, the side chick, the mistress or whatever. Even national football teams use us. They say, oh, we're going to move to San Antonio if you don't give us a stadium, this and that. We fall for it every time. So there is a kind of a apprehension. There's a tension, if you will, for things that we truly identify as San Antonio. Mm-hmm. And the Alamo is one of them. And Jason, I love your book. I was on the anti-Alamo wave well before your book came about, but your book is amazing because I point that out. I tell people all the time, this is the true history of the Alamo. And I get tons of pushback from my friends who were in those 7th grade classes along with me and see all these colonizers, all these out-of-towners that we revere as Texas heroes that really were just pushing slavery. That's really what it's all about. I don't care what anybody else says. When you're talking about freedom, but you don't mean freedom for somebody else, that's not freedom. You know what I'm saying? That's injustice. And so just having this conversation is just wonderful to have, the three respected folks, having a meaningful conversation. So I just really appreciate all y'all taking the time to really deconstruct the nuance regarding taco culture here in San Antonio, but also, education. My final point will be, I'm literally going on a book caravan tomorrow. I'm collecting books right now, driving. That's what Isidro was talking about. I'm collecting books. I'm driving right now to the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center to deliver these books and book racks because tomorrow we're taking a caravan to Austin to show these books that we are trafficking illegal books that are listed as banned from the CRT books. But also, this applies to everybody. Jason, you yourself, your book is talking about history, research history. This isn't some fake news or alternative facts. This is real history. And your book was banned. It was literally banned from a presentation. Yep. The folks went out of their way to make sure that your book was not out there. And we're not talking about some Ponzi scheme or somebody doing, pushing out some false, narrative. No, these are facts that were well researched by three, good writers. So imagine how that's going on with everything else right now, with the CRT discussion, with the discussion around, racism, and really a reckoning that America has yet to really come to. And we still need to do, because if we don't, we keep continuing with this miseducation. So I can go on, but thank y'all so much for having this conversation, and thank y'all three for just making this happen, because these are the type of conversations that we really need to have.
Yeah. I love the passion in your voice, Rodrigo. It's always welcome here, man. Thanks, brother.
Hey, and I want to bring up, it's not like we certainly weren't the first ones to write this history. Hispanic scholars have been doing this for a long, long time. And academics and writers, and they've been ignored for a long time. And so part of our goal in writing this book was to make sure that they were heard. And I'm gratified that we were able to do that.
Well, can I add one final point?
Yes.
Very briefly. Yes. And Jason's absolutely correct on that. But it is white people that need to do the most work. We really need people like Jason, folks that understand that the history, we're not here to indict y'all. Well, we want y'all to come to terms with the past and how that affects the present, so we can move better in the future.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, fixing racism is my job.
Thank you. Well, we like to end on a positive note. It's the talk quote of the week, and it's Isidro's. So I'm going to let him share it.
Yeah. So real quick, a talk quote is a quote with a little bit of a taco twist to it. Kind of like this show. We talk about tacos, but we also talk about a lot of other things. But this week's talk quote is, the odds always favor the tortillas like the salsa flavors the taco. Don't bet against this history. Don't bet against what we're doing. Don't bet against the Mexicanos, that we're here to make tacos taste better. But also, it's just, a good taco comes with all kinds of ingredients. It's what you make of it. But the intention is to be good. And this is what we try to bring on this show. So, Jason, I can't thank you enough for, making the time. I know you're busy. Anybody with a red tie is busy. I'm kidding. No, it's very important that we have these type of discussions, and we can't be more than thankful for you showing up to our show.
This was just so great. Thank you so much for having me on. This did my heart good. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. The honor is ours. In the meantime, folks, well, as we wrap it up, follow Jason on Twitter at JAS Stanford. And on Fireside, I don't know how active he plans on being, but he's always welcome on our show. And in the meantime, everyone, go eat tacos.
Yeah, and I want to thank Elizabeth, Allison, again, Rodrigo for his fashion, my sister Patty, Shira, Cara, Ray, Allison, thank you so much for joining us today. We bring these things because tacos has a lot of ingredients to it, and sometimes you don't see them, but you certainly hear them here. So on behalf of Jason and my co-host, José Ralat, I am the proud son of a taquero, and this is 10,000 Tacos.